Hello everyone, it's Mr. Kablan here and welcome to Grade 9 Academic Math. And today I will be starting off with the very first lesson, which deals with rounding numbers. So let's get right to it right now and let's get this lesson started. All right, so when we're dealing about rounding numbers, what we want to understand again is how we can round numbers and also just to relate it to everyday applications as well. All right, so let's take a look at what it means to round numbers when we have larger decimal places. So when dealing with rounding numbers, what you tend to get here is get a large number, and what we're going to do here is shrink it. But before we actually learn how to do that, let's talk about what are called place values. So you notice on the screen there, you have the numbers 1, 3, 4, and 8 to the left of the decimal point, and the numbers 8, 3, 6 to the right of the decimal point. Now, each of those numbers there have what's called a place value. So starting off with the first number to the left of the decimal, okay, this is what's called the ones column. Okay, so again, the purpose of this is to see how we can use place values to determine how we can round a number up or round it down. Now, the number to the left of that is what's called the tens column. The one to the left of that is the hundreds column. And last but not least, to the left of that is the thousands column. Now, obviously, numbers are infinite, which means they keep on going. So the further left you go, okay, the numbers change. So for example, when you have a number to the left of the thousands column, that would become the 10,000s column. Now, to the numbers to the right, okay, I want you to pay very close attention to what these ones are called because they sound very similar to the ones on the left. So the first number to the right of the decimal, this is what's called the tenths column. Okay, so I don't want you to confuse this with the tens and the tenths here, all right? Now, the number to the right of that is what's called the hundredths column. And last but not least, this one over here, this is going to be the thousands column. Now, much like very similar fashion to the numbers on the left, as we go to the right of the decimal place, the place value also increases. So for example, the number to the right of the thousands column will be the 10,000s column, and so forth. Okay, so the purpose of rounding again is to take a very large number or large looking number and to reduce it by rounding to make it smaller. And even though that sounds like a good thing, okay, what often happens is that the accuracy of the number then actually decreases depending on when it's used for. So it says here, rounding involves reducing the number of digits in a number while keeping its value similar. Now, as I mentioned earlier, okay, even though it's easier and numbers will be easier to read, okay, it's not as accurate as you would like it. So for example, when you're buying something, okay, and something costs $5.97, okay, we tend to round it to what's called the nearest dollar, okay, so we don't have to worry about the cents, the numbers after the dollar amount. Now, when you think about the dollar amount of $5.97, and I want you to think about the number that is closest to that. Now, if your answer there was 6, as you can see, then you're absolutely correct. Okay, so when we're in this case here, this is an example of rounding up because we're rounding up to the nearest whole number, which, as I said before, is the number 6. All right, so that's a common everyday example here in terms of how we can use rounding in everyday life, especially now they've eliminated the pennies here in Canada. So this is where it becomes very useful and for you to understand why rounding is important. Okay. Now, the number that we need to focus on when we are rounding is the number 5, because the number 5 tells us what we need to do with the number, whether we should round it up or round it down. Now, the number 5 serves as a reference point because depending on what the number is, okay, that's going to determine which direction, up or down, the number is going to go. So, as we're going through these over here, okay, the purpose of the number 5, again, is to determine whether the number rounds up or down. And as you can see here, it says if the digit is less than 5, okay, the number remains the same, and that's called rounding down. Okay, whereas if the digit is 5 or more, then it increases up by 1, which is an example of rounding up. So let's take a look at an example to make this a little bit clearer over here. So we have a number here of 235.762. And what we're going to do here, we're going to do several examples of this one number so you can understand how rounding happens. All right, so it says here for question A, round this number to the nearest 10. So step number one, what we want to do here is to decide the last digit that we will keep or change. So you have to look at this number over here and you have to ask yourself, which number here belongs in that tens column. So if you look at 235.762, okay, you should see and understand here that 3 here is the number that's in the tens column. Okay, so that's step number one. Now, for step number two, we need to look to the right of that number, okay, and determine whether that 3 goes up or remains the same. Okay, so notice what we have here is the number 5. Now, the number 5 will tell us that the number 3 now needs to round up. Now, when we're rounding to the nearest 10, okay, what's going to happen here is not only does the 3 change to 4, okay, but the rest of the numbers, okay, become 0. Now, the nearest 10 tells us here that it's going to be a whole number as our final answer. So what we wind up having here as our final answer here is 240, okay? Now, again, keep in mind that all questions and any questions that ask you to deal with the nearest 10 will always be a whole number like that with no numbers after a decimal. Now, for this next one here, it says round the number to the nearest 10th. Okay, so just like the previous example, we have to determine which number is in the tenths column. So if you take a look at the numbers here, you should see that 7 is in the tenths column. Okay, so now that we've determined that, we look to the right of that number, which in this case here is the 6. Now 6 is a number that's higher than 5. So what's going to happen here is that 7 is going to change to an 8. So the final answer for this will be 235.8. Now you notice when we're rounding, okay, after we round the number up or down, the remainder of the numbers are no longer there. Okay, so that's what rounding is. And when you're rounding to the nearest 10th, all your answers will be one number after the decimal place. All right, so again, same number, obviously different questions and examples here. It says round this number to the nearest 100. So what we want to do here is to find which number here is in the hundreds column. And as you can see here, that's going to be the number 2. Now, this is going to be different because we haven't seen an example of this just yet. So if you take a look at the number to the right of it, you notice there it's the number 3. So now we're going to see what it means to round down. Now what happens over here is that the 2 remains as a 2, and what rounding down means is that all those numbers there, specifically the 3 and the 5, are now going to go to the nearest 100, which in this case here is 200. Okay, so when you're looking at the rounding here, again, just ask yourself, which number is closest to 235? Is it 200 or 300? Because that's what the nearest 100 means. Okay, so for example, in this case here, since 235 is closer to 200, the answer for this answer here is 200. Okay, and for this next one here is round this number to the nearest 100th. So if you take a look at this number that we have here, you should see that the 6 here is in the hundreds column. Now, in this example over here, to the right of it is the number 2, which tells us that what we're going to be doing here is rounding down. So what happens over here is the 6 remains the same, okay, and the 2 basically disappears. So the final answer to this will be 235.76, okay. Now you notice that for the nearest 100th, there's 2 numbers to the right of the decimal place, and that will be the same for any questions that ask you the nearest 100th. Okay, so sticking with the same number, now we're going to just twist it up a bit here. So in this case here, round this number to the nearest whole number. Now, what this is asking you to do here is to take this number that you have here, okay, and basically have a number that doesn't have any numbers to the right of the decimal. And this is similar to the first example we looked at where we took the 5 here, which was in the ones column, and from here determine whether we round up or down. Now, if we take a look at the right of this 5 over here, you notice that this here is a 7. So that tells us that this 5 is going to round up to a 6. So the answer for this will be 236, which is a whole number because there's no numbers to the right of the decimal place. All right, so for part F here, it says round this number to 4 significant digits. So in 3 stars there, and this is just an important highlight here, it says to round to a certain number of digits, we have to count the digits from the left to the right, okay, and then from there round. Okay, so in this case over here, if you start from the left over here, this 2, if you count to the 4th digit, okay, starting from this 2 over here, that will be our 4th digit that we need to figure out whether we round up or round down. So we have 1, 2, 3, and the 4th digit here is a 7. So you notice to the right of the 7 here is a 6. So since 6 is higher than 5, that 7 rounds up to an 8. So this number rounded to 4 significant digits here will be 235.8. All right, so you've seen, again, different types of examples here dealing with the rounding over here. Now, just a little special note when it comes to rounding and significant digits. Okay, when we are counting from left to right, if there are what are called leading zeros, which are the zeros before a number appears that is not a 0, okay, we do not include those. So an example I'm just going to throw down here is that if we have the number 0.00047, okay, this is an example of 2 significant digits because the 2 non-zero numbers after the leading zeros are 4 and 7. Okay, so those are the non-zero numbers. Now, let's just say you had a number such as 0.000407. Okay, so if you had 0.000407, where the 0, okay, happens to be in between 2 non-zero digits, okay, that 0 now becomes a significant digit. So if we had 0.000407, then it would be 3 significant digits. All right. So that wraps up this particular lesson over here. So you can now turn the page and start working on the questions. And I will see you on the next lesson.